Hello everybody, and welcome to our day before Thanksgiving class of Philosophy of Religion. I'm going to be giving a short little lecture, and there'll be a sort of a reading and a quiz to go along with it. So without further ado, we've talked in this class about theistic arguments for the existence of God. And we've just finished talking about the primary atheistic argument against the existence of God, namely the argument from evil. What I want to talk about now is an argument that's not really for or against the existence of God, but has historically posed a sort of difficult puzzle for religion. For most religions, for Christianity, Islam, Judaism in particular, but the original formulation of the argument goes way back to ancient pagan religions, and so it's nothing particular to any one religion. It's just a general problem for religions. And the argument has a name, and the name is based on the first place where it was ever given that we know about. It was in a dialogue called the Euthyphro by Plato. So this is, in that sense, probably the oldest thing we're going to be reading in this class. Plato was, as most of you hopefully know, an ancient Greek philosopher. He lived about 2,300 to 2,400 years ago, long before Christianity, long before Christ was around, about 300 to 400 years before Christ. However, he's considered to be, in some ways, the father of a lot of Christian theology. St. Augustine, in particular, was a big fan of Plato's and thought that Plato was what you should read if you want to understand about Christianity. So there's an interesting amount of overlap there. In the reading, the Euthyphro, that's what it's just called, there are two characters. One of them is Socrates, who you hopefully know to be Plato's teacher, Plato's mentor, the guy that Plato just loved more than anybody else in the world. And he's considered by many to be one of the first real philosophers. There was some philosophy before Socrates, but it's even referred to as pre-Socratic philosophy, this sort of philosophy before it was really cool, when Socrates came along. Eventually he was killed by the Athenians because they thought he was a troublemaker. And this dialogue, the Euthyphro, occurs supposedly on the day that he's going to trial. On the way to trial, Socrates runs into a young man by the name of Euthyphro, hence the name of the dialogue, and they start having a discussion about piety and what exactly piety is. Euthyphro thinks he knows. Euthyphro thinks he's just the bee's knees with regard to knowing all sorts of things about religion, and in particular he thinks piety supports him in what he's doing in this dialogue, which he's going to go prosecute his father for murder. The story, and I'll let you read it in the dialogue, is kind of weird. His father, this man, a servant of his father, killed one of Euthyphro's slaves, and then the father bound up the servant and threw him in a ditch, and then forgot about him, and the guy died of dehydration, basically. So it's kind of a strange scenario, but that's not really what's important for us in philosophy. Euthyphro is defending his actions, prosecuting his father, by pointing out that it's what the gods would do. Sorry, my little camera's slipping a bit. He says, look, the gods believe that you should prosecute guilty people no matter what, and so there you are. And Socrates asks him how he's so sure that the gods believe that. And he says it's because I, Euthyphro, know everything about piety. I know what it is to be pious. And then he does indeed cite a bunch of examples where the ancient Greek gods did things like prosecute their father. If you know some of these stories, Zeus did something a lot worse than just prosecuting his father to his father Kronos. And so they get into a long discussion about this, about how the gods differ on all sorts of things, and sons of the gods would prosecute the fathers of the gods at various times. Stupid camera keeps slipping. All right. Anyway. That stuff is not super important to us in philosophy. It's sort of interesting, but what really matters to us is something that happens about halfway through the dialogue. Socrates eventually gets a bunch of different definitions of piety out of Plato, and eventually he narrows him down to this. Piety is defined as follows. Something is pious if it is loved by the gods. In other words, the gods love all the pious things, and all the pious things are loved by the gods. There's a sort of perfect correlation between piety and love by gods. Socrates is willing to concede this after a few objections that the gods disagree about what they love and things like that. But then he goes on to ask this question, which turns out to be a kind of thorny question. He says, given an action that we all agree is pious, giving money to a church or being nice to people, whatever you think is pious, given a pious action, a pious action A, whatever it is A pious because the gods love it? Or do the gods love it? Should be lowercase g because we're talking about polytheistic gods. Do the gods love it because it's pious? And this question, is it pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's pious, is simply known as the Euthyphro dilemma. And to make this really relevant to us and make it so that we actually are going to care about the answer here, I'm going to make a few changes to the Euthyphro dilemma. This is the one that Plato comes up with. And for him it's good because this matches the kind of things that he likes to talk about, piety and plural gods and things like that. But if we want to take this into modern day Christianity or Islam or whatever mainstream religion, we're gonna want to make a few little changes here, and we might even want to change piety. We often don't talk about piety these days. I mean, it's still a thing that people are and people aren't. Oh, one second, there's someone at the door.